first? Okay, this is extra. Okay, so yesterday we added types of evolution. We put by natural selection. So all this is still natural selection. So when you hear that, everybody should be able to tell me something about what that means. So your projects were based upon natural selection. So what does that mean? If I'm an organism born into an environment, okay, so Nigel.
Like, if you have a tail and you don't need it, like the people that have it is like basically whenever you breathe like something you don't need out or something that you do need in, like with the long legs and the short legs, like if the long legs make you faster, then the animals with the short legs is gonna die and with the long legs is gonna breathe.
So if so why do they die? Like if they don't have the favored adaptation in the environment, why are they dying?
They're not perfectly adapted to the environment.
Right, they may be freezing to death, or maybe they are overheated, or maybe they can't problem solve and they need to, or maybe they get eaten by a predator. Something keeps them from reproducing. So let's say that you've got all of y'all are perfectly adapted into your environment, into their environment. Then what is that increasing for them? Not only their survival rate, but what else? What are they going to be able to do, hopefully? Reproduce. So all of these, natural selection is the only way we can actually get new species, okay? But we know that there's different ways, and depending on the relationships and the environment, that we can see some different patterns of evolution or types of evolution. So coevolution. What was coevolution?
Two different species push the chain in each other because they interact regularly.
So two different species altogether, but they are pushing and creating some type of pressure with each other. So either pollinators are trying to attract, flowers are trying to attract a pollinator, or we said the predator-prey business about a prey getting faster, and that means the predator better get faster or it's not going to catch its food. So what would be another one that I left out?
Parasite host.
Parasite host. Okay, so if a parasite doesn't want to hurt its host, it just wants to get some food. Unfortunately, sometimes these parasites also have parasites inside of them, and they will make the host sick. So we know that that's not the intent of the parasite, but it happens. Hopefully, I can get some resistance to that parasite, and then so it's this evolutionary arms race. Really, is what it's called. All right. So tell me about adaptive radiation.
We didn't get that far.
Okay. So adaptive radiation. Here we go. Adaptive radiation is when one species gives rise to two or more new species. They are the ancestor, to two or more different species. So an example of that, as far as like a little graph, is here's your ancestor, and at some point they branched off. It might be that they split into two separate populations. So if this is the green iguana of the Galapagos, this will be the marine iguana, and this would be the land iguana. So species 1, species 2. It might be the 14 different types of finches on the Galapagos Islands. They have an ancestor on the mainland, but they have now become 14 different species. So according to yesterday, when we were looking at those lizards, what causes this to happen? We know it's all by natural selection, but what had to happen first to that lizard population? Right, had to be separated. And what do we call that? Do you remember?
Separation.
Genetic.
Geographic isolation. All right, so I'm going to say by geographic isolation. So now you can't breed with the members of your group, of your population, of your species, and natural selection. Okay, so this is something else. The first tortoises that actually moved either by raft or whatever to the Galapagos Islands, they were little. They weren't this big. So when we look at these things, and they're like hundreds of pounds, those tortoises, big giant tortoises. When you're isolated and you don't have natural predators, you grow very large. You get to be really big. So that's one reason that some of these animals normally wouldn't be that large. A good example of that are, have y'all heard of the pythons of, they've been released, or not the pythons, the, ball pythons that have been released in the Everglades. Normally, they are not that big in their native habitat, but because people have released them and just put them in the Florida Everglades, these things are like 15 feet long. They're humongous. They eat small, like they would eat a medium-sized dog. They try to eat crocodiles. I mean, so when we come back from break, you'll actually see some different old video of that, and we'll talk about non-native species and stuff like that. You know, so if you don't have natural predators, you might as well grow to be, pretty large. Just looking for those big. It's in here somewhere. Oh well. Here are those iguanas. So yeah, here's the land iguana, and it looks a lot like this one, but they're two separate species now. But they came from the same. Now genetic research of the DNA shows that they came from the same species or original species. But all these, they're isolated out in the middle of the ocean, and that happens. So the next one is something that has nothing to do with becoming separate species, but it's when two or more unrelated species, they can't become the same species, but they become to look more similar. So two or more unrelated species become more similar because I want you to tell me. So I want you to picture a whale, a dolphin, a porpoise, seal, walrus, penguin. None of them are related originally. But why is it they all have a similar body plan?
They live in the same habitat.
That's it. It is the environmental pressure that they feel. They better be a good swimmer or you're going to be eaten by that predator. So those that had those original mutations that were more streamlined bodies, they started losing some of their body hair. Their bodies are hydrodynamic. So because they live in the same environment, you have the same environmental pressures. So for them, they have to have really big, efficient swimmers. So they all have like a paddle-like appendage because of that. Even the wings of that penguin look like paddles. But this is the funny thing about those is that for the whales, the dolphins, the porpoise, the seals, the walruses, they evolved from a four-legged animal. Four-legged, dog-like. So that's kind of bizarre. Not one mammal evolved originally from the water. All mammals started on the land, and they moved into the ocean. So why would they move? I mean, why would they move from like getting plenty of oxygen and not having to hold your breath and have to swim around instead of running or flying or something like that? Because why? What might there be more of out there in the ocean? Maybe less, more food, less competition. Yeah, so that's what happened. So those first early whales, most likely, some of them could hold their breath better. They could actually swim, and they could actually dive down under. Those that couldn't stopped reproducing. Those that could started reproducing. This was over a long period of time. But you can see the evolution of whales in the Smithsonian in Washington. It's actually suspended there in that Natural History Museum. It's pretty fascinating.
What's the name of it? I think I know it.
Well, if you look at whale evolution, you'll see these are all in the fossil record. You can see it. They have these little larger leg bones, then they got smaller, and then they got smaller, and now they're inside. They have a femur, but they're just real little and have like a little pelvis that's left over. So it happens. So I would say the examples of this would be like, as far as a graph, is they're never going to merge into the same species if they become more similar over time. So here's a species and here's a species. So aquatic mammals is my example, but here's another one. Someone look up on your phone wolverine and Tasmanian devil and see if you can get a picture of both of them next to each other. And I'll put it up here because that's another example. Wolverine.
Can you scroll?
And Tasmanian devil. Do y'all know what a Tasmanian devil looks like?
Yeah.
No, not the one from
Dark, it's dark fur.
Yeah.
You might have it yet. Nigel, do you have it?
Yeah.
Do you have a picture of both of them?
I think that's what they are.
Okay, bring it up here. Let's put it up here because this is another example of convergent evolution. These two things are not related at all. A Tasmanian devil is a marsupial. It has a pouch. Totally has a pouch. Yes. And so it has a pouch. Wolverines live in our country. They don't have a pouch.
Oh, they real?
Yes.
That's a honey badger.
That's a honey badger. Like, no.
Which one is the Wolverine?
Someone to get a picture.
I keep taking my glasses.
Well, like, there is not a real picture, but it's on a book.
Yeah, there's a book. Picture of it. Da-da-da.
They both look similar.
They do. Their faces do look very similar.
They look like rats.
Their claws kind of look similar.
Mhm. But their faces, their fur, and it's all because they live in the same environment, same environmental pressures. So that's what convergent is. Converging roads come together, and that's what's happening. All right, so tell me what you know about these two words. If I tell you that they are the opposite, what is speciation versus extinction?
Speciation is dealing with many species, and extinction is them dying off.
All right, so hold up. So let's go for what we know. What happens in extinction of a species? We all say dinosaurs, dodo bird,
They decrease.
passenger pigeon's another one.
They decrease.
Decrease,
Or like go away.
disappear.
I didn't
So-
know it was in all of it.
You can have localized extinction where you can push them to extinction in Lexington and we annihilate them, or you can annihilate them off the face of the planet. So extinction is the disappearance of a species. Now that kind of makes it sound like an alien kind of like abducted them and took them away, but basically they're gone forever. So once they're gone forever, their genes are gone forever, and the only way you can bring those back is if we could clone them some way. So some animals might be possible in the future to clone, but the thing is you're only going to have one genetic group. So then there's just a bunch of clones. They can't reproduce with each other. It would be more of a sideshow, you know, to say, hey, we just cloned this animal back from extinction. And that's Jurassic Park.
So they wouldn't be able to reproduce.
What's the
with
name of
other
that one TV?
animals.
You have to be able to sustain the species. You got to have a genetic pool there to pull from. So they wouldn't. But
Wait,
But anyway.
why wouldn't they if they're a clone? Though? If it's a clone and it's of the.
but if it's not a asexual species to begin with, they can't reproduce.
Hey, it wouldn't make sense because, like, say you did pick a dodo bird, right? And you got its DNA. You couldn't, like, make a baby of it because there's not another dodo bird to mate it with. So it would be a mix of something else with it.
Right. And the problem with bringing back the woolly mammoth, because the woolly mammoth is humongous. I mean, really, really large, way larger than the current elephants that are its closest ancestors. So if you don't have a uterus to be able to carry that huge mammoth baby plus give birth to it, there's no way. Because they're pregnant almost 2 years. An elephant normally. So that brings us to this. What kind of species are more prone to extinction? Which ones do you think of? They're never going to go extinct.
Yeah.
Right.
It is pregnant 2 years.
So who are the ones that are more prone to extinction?
Small.
like
Small?
things that are already endangered, like eagles. And
But why are they endangered?
Because people are killing them.
Far too cheap.
Okay, so there's more deaths than they have time to reproduce and like replenish itself.
There's more dying.
Right, so more death than births. So what's the difference in a hamster that can reproduce almost every month and make lots of babies versus an elephant that only has one baby every 2 years?
They can't reproduce fast enough.
So usually it's the large-bodied animals, the ones that have a long generation time, the one that takes forever to mature, and they only have a couple babies at a time. So that's why I think about it. Tigers, your elephants, your sea turtles, which are kind of like that, not really. Large whales. So those are the ones that are prone to extinction. What do you think is the number one cause? That's a good example. That's a close, that's like second, third.
So
There's one that we do, sometimes we don't even realize we do it, but kind of goes along with it.
oh boy.
well, you know,
All right, let me tell, look, here's an example. Giant panda eats only one thing, bamboo.
So we get rid of their food source.
Deforestation.
Annihilate the habitat, destroy the habitat somehow, you've done it. Because think about it, if I'm a giant panda and the only thing I eat is bamboo, and my bamboo forest just got wiped out, I have no hope. No hope. Let's just put them in a zoo. Well, you can't sustain that forever, not for a whole species. So y'all
get eaten by that one.
in your generation, you're going to see the extinction of some big time animals. I'm really afraid. I'm afraid that your grandkids will never know what an elephant is. They're never going to know what some of the tigers are. They're never going to know some of these big ones that you've grown up knowing about. They're going to be on the extinct list. So as a society, we've got to embrace that more than what we do. Still people, there's a huge trade, y'all. It's worth a lot of money. Is just to kill the elephant right in its tracks for its ivory.
What is that?
It's like their tusks. They make like
It's worth a lot of money.
And
It's illegal,
they
but
make
people do it all the time.
figurines out of it. Like they
Isn't
make
that
figurines and a whole bunch of stuff out of it.
So the number one cause is habitat destruction. And we're going to come back to that. So before you're extinct, you're endangered, right? So first you're endangered, and then you become extinct. So just know that when we hear that word, if you're on the endangered species list, then your population is at risk of not being able to sustain itself. And also, the endangered species, at least the laws in our country, protects the habitat too, and that's why. It's because that's how we're killing them. So if extinction is getting rid of them, what is speciation?
Bring it back.
Can't bring them back to life. Yeah, make a new species. So this is the creation of new species. And it's happening. And there's species we have no clue that they're out there. So the creation of new species by natural selection, geographic isolation. So it's happening. It just takes a long time. So unfortunately, which one's higher, extinction rate or speciation rate?
Extinction.
What if like
Sad.
people
One second.
buy some water and just start going underwater and just holding their breath for as long as they could, and just live there for like thousands of years, with like they eventually turn into some fish people?
It has to start with a mutation though. And that's going to be one of the answers for your search and rescues. Like, what is the only way you can add new traits, new genes to the pool?
So it can't be like,
It has to start as a mutation. So if you have a mutation, and I'm sure there are people, I'm sure there's people who can hold their breaths incredibly long. Well, then if we're going to move to the water more, then just those would be reproducing. Just the long breath holders would start reproducing. All those that are like gasping for breath for like 10 seconds, they would die off. So it has to be a shift like that. But it's happening. Who knows what's happening? We're just here living our lives. But, how do you decide who you mate with? It all comes down to mating. So it's It's a whole different way to think about it, but that's how evolution drives change on this planet. Problem is we kind of we influence it. So do you think we should clone endangered species or clone endangered species? Should we be able to clone endangered ones before they become extinct?
Yes.
No, I think we should keep them like in a place where they can make more. Besides cloning.
Yeah, the cloning will just make worse.
Certainly.
You can't reproduce.
As long as we clone enough males and enough females, they have
Yeah,
options.
they could reproduce.
They had options, but if we do it all in a lab, can we actually and keep them in a zoo? We can't put them out there.
Because they wouldn't be adapted correctly to.
But that is one use of cloning is to do that. So I don't know. So when folks ask me, does evolution really happen? Well, here's all these different evidence of evolution. We're just going to number them. Y'all have the pictures of them. So why would looking at embryos of different animals be evidence of evolution?
Because then we have different embryos.
What do you notice about them?
They smaller and inside.
But can you tell a difference between a human embryo and a cat embryo? I can't. I mean, there's a human. I think that's a cat one right there. They look the same to me. So this, whether you believe it or not, this is what they'll tell you. The fact that they look so similar early on might be because they have a common ancestor. Okay, or that there's evidence that might be. There's a turtle, and that's a turtle embryo. I mean, it's kind of like a person to me.
Yeah.
So a gene cuts on, and you become more like your species. So I'll just put possible common ancestor. That's going to be one of our go-to answers. So ancestor. All right, and that's true for all this. So look at these. That's a whale. That's the pelvis and the leg bone. There's a snake. This is a snake. Has leg bones inside, steel. And then here is our appendix and also wisdom teeth for us. So that's appendix. None of these work anymore. They don't have a purpose. So why would we look at those? Nothing. It used to, it's right down here, and it used to digest cellulose. So the cell wall of all plant cells, so your fiber. When earlier humans or our ancestors ate more like plants, and we could digest that better. But ours is just like a dud. It's just like this little empty dud organ. It doesn't do anything. Because when the food passes from the small intestine and it meets up with the large intestine right here, some of that stuff gets in there and it gets infected. Mm-hmm. And the bacteria gets in there and it causes an infection. And that's why you have to get it removed. So it's just kind of a nuisance. But like wisdom teeth, some of y'all may not even have wisdom teeth. Or you might be born with 2, or you may have 3, or you may have all 4. But y'all, you don't use wisdom teeth. They're those really back ones. So any of y'all have wisdom teeth that they're coming through, or you can feel them in the very back? Like the flap of skin might start to be coming up.
Yeah.
And if they grow in like this, a lot of times you have them cut out or pulled out, but you don't really use them.
Mine are still there, they're just really small.
They might start being smaller because we don't use them. Well, they're just left over, and our mouths are, our jaws are not so big and blocky, so we don't have as much room anymore for those. We just don't use them. We don't need them to chew. So all these have no longer have a function. They no longer have a function, but did in an ancestor. Okay, so all it is evidence that change has happened. I mean, that's all it is. But it's kind of cool, I think, that we have some structures that are no longer in use. Okay, and then what's this one right here? This is biochemistry. So what do we know about comparing DNA?
it has a complementary strand.
Okay, so if you compare the DNA of different organisms, what's it going to tell you? Or if they are the same or they're not the same, right? So, so compare DNA of different organisms or their amino acids. So this is what they can do on your test. They would say A, B, C, and D. And they'd say, which organism has the most, is genetically similar to a human?
See,
Actually,
So who has the most alike?
it's C.
So C, you're right, because, or they may say, who is its most, who is its ancestor, or not ancestor, who is it most related to? And you would say C. All right, so what are the other two?
It's crazy.
B.
It is.
It's
Who else are really closely related that's in there?
it's B and then A.
B,
Zebras and horses.
yep. Horse and zebra are real similar too. So that is a pretty foolproof way of comparing DNA.
Well, that's crazy.
I know. We're very, very similar with our protein, our DNA. What do you know about fossils? What is a fossil?
A remnant
Like a
of
bone.
bones.
Okay, it can be bones.
Bone marrow.
All right, what else can it be? But, yep. It's any evidence of past life. And it used to be fossils is all we had to go on. But now we have DNA evidence and we can compare the DNA. But y'all talked about dating fossils, right? With radioactive isotopes.
I think that's how they found out that the dinosaurs were becoming extinct. So they left their fossils behind.
Well, and we can date how old they are, but also you can dig down and compare the different rock layers. So where would you find the oldest fossils if you're digging down? Bottom, so as deep as they go at the bottom, because the newer ones are going to be laid on top, right? So the deeper you go, so when you go to the mountains, you actually see seashell fossils in our mountains.
So now you be underground.
That land used to be under the water.
So sea level has lowered or not sufficient.
That's
And
why.
do you remember convergent plate boundaries where they come together?
Yeah.
Right, and they went and created that mountain chain.
What happens if that's near volcano? Because volcanoes, when the lava, something boils up in the bottom, and the bottom of it is naturally. So,
And that's also convergent plate boundary. It goes down like this, and a volcano can form.
then it breaks
And divergent creates those rift valleys.
It's
So
gonna turn into a lava line. Not ash.
it can. And then I don't know why I'm going in this order, y'all. It doesn't matter. But last one is, what does homo mean? Same. So these are structures. What do you notice about a whale flipper, a cat foreleg, our forearm, and a bat's forearm?
They're all similar. They're like,
They have the same bones.
yeah.
But why do they not look the same? They adapted for what?
They're different environments.
Different environment. So these are the ones that look similar inside. Is that us? Oh, good. But look different outside.
You know what?
Due to use.
That
Okay.
sounds like getting wet.
There. Or environment. So homologous structures.
Because they fur. If a cat get wet, then it dries, it's like under the skin, and under the fur, it's still gonna be wet a little bit. So then it starts to stink. So that's what I like.
It doesn't have the waterproof in as much, maybe too. Yeah. Okay. It's a lot, but now we're all caught.
That's him. That's the same thing between a pit bull and a cat. Because pit bull, they can just shake it all the way.
Cats don't know what to do. It's kind of like. Okay, so let's see what time it is.